Good day, Ivanka.
Hey there.
Hi. I'm putting some finishing touches on the document here that um, yeah. It's RSA, so I don't know how many people are going to be here today, but oh, there's one thing I need to do. Almost done.
Hello, Mark. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Um, all right, we're going to start here basically now. So let's see. Um, Good day, everyone. Sorry, I was engrossed trying to update our reference architecture document and didn't even notice people filing in. There you go. So this is the first thing I'm going to do is put the link to the meeting minutes. All right. So put that in the chat. And yeah, so start putting your names down on the attendee list on that document. Let's see. So I advertised 3 topics for today. As usual, remind folks you are always welcome to bring your own topics. So now is a good time to mention them if you have any for today. Um, so two things, maybe three, that I would like to discuss today. One is the update on our IETF informational draft efforts. So, Yogesh, do you
Yeah.
want to start us off?
Sure. Just give me a sec. I had loaded it in a minute. Give me a minute. Otherwise, I will load it again and share stuff with you.
Mhm.
So I've been working on this quite a bit today. I've been
Would you like to would you like me to stop sharing so you can share your
No, I don't
screen?
think you are
No?
sharing at the moment.
Oh, I
So
am
I
not. Right. Okay.
yeah.
You're right.
So yeah. So this is the
So,
repo which I
yeah.
moved from last week,
Mhm.
and I have been so this is the original editor's copy, which has mark your name and my name. But feel free if anybody wants to actively contribute to this.
Mhm.
Um, I have been working on adding requirements to this, so I have created a pull request which has been worked upon.
Oh,
Eh,
moving all our requirements into the
yes,
informational
it's to
draft.
the informational draft,
Should we
but
have our requirements as a separate MD file,
uh,
or is it going to create synchronization problems? Like, what's the
uh,
master copy of our requirements right now?
the I'm thinking let's start here, and if we think we need to fork another document because each of these informational drafts have the way they build the CI/CD. Each is supposed to have a separate repo, so we have to go through the same repo stuff again, asking for a new repo with permissions and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So we'll start here and see, because we have time, as Hank mentioned last week, we have time till June, so we can firm up the requirements, and if possible, I want to do some kind of scenario deployment diagrams as well in this document.
Yes.
And that's why I think that would touch a brief aspects of architecture. So we can go to the draft and say, hey, here are the requirements, a set of practical use cases, and the roles. We are firming up our architecture, but this is the kind of rough schema of things.
Mhm.
You see, that's what
Yeah.
I look at. So I've tried to mm, set the core requirements with some title bullets like workload deployment. So basically, what we are stating, I realized, Mark, is the way you have phrased the requirements is that we are stating some facts, which then leads to certain requirements, which we are not very clear in distinguishing what are core requirements versus what are the facts. Like these are facts, like workload can be deployed in a wide variety of environments, like in public cloud. So the our requirement is effectively the TWI architecture must support all the above deployments, right? That is the requirement coming out of those facts, right?
Uh,
Uh,
sure. Sure.
So, or is there a better way to represent it? It's just all about how you phrase the requirements so that they look as requirements rather than information.
Well, I mean, a little bit of both, right? So, for
Mhm,
instance,
mhm,
if you choose not to list personal devices, in bullet 5, then by that we're basically saying, this is out of scope, right?
mhm.
Versus, right? So that's like there is a scope to requirements.
Yeah. So I was
So, I
just
mean, you
thinking of
can look
better
at
way
it,
of phrasing it. Yeah.
both ways. Well, I mean, the you can basically put the TRI architecture must support uh, all of the deployment types below,
Yeah.
right? And then, okay, so I think that's final wordsmithing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. So what I've done is I have done some fact documentation, and they say our
yeah,
architecture must support all the above types of work. Similarly, I've tried to keep as much as possible your draft without breaking too much, and then just adding one liner which we can always
yeah.
delete if people think it is not
hmm
required. I'm happy to delete that. So
I think I would prefer a different approach here. I would
okay.
take our requirements document, as it
Yeah.
exists in Google
Mhm.
Docs, convert it to MD file, put it in
Mhm.
our depot,
Okay.
and then incorporate it by reference from this informational draft. Because the
Okay.
thing
You are
is, what I
saying.
don't want to do
Mhm.
is I don't want to edit it in multiple places. It's still an informational draft. It's not an RFC, so, people can open the link very easily and see for themselves what the requirements are. And you can comment to them and whatnot. And then the informational draft should then focus primarily on the things we want Whimsy to hear. I think it's more important to tell Whimsy, our requirements are our requirements. Look, we still need to support all the things that we say we supported. We already talked about it. There isn't really much of a question there. What is interesting to Whimsy is how are you going to work, how are we intending to work with Whimsy on aligning, uh, making Whimsy work for this, right? So for instance, I'll give you like an example. We do want to use Windows identity tokens if we're, if we're going for JOTs. We definitely want to work with, the X509 certificates, that Whimsy supports, right? And like, Spiffy is aligned to Whimsy in the same way. Those would be important. And then we can talk about, what's the role of context, Whimsy context. I have like so far no idea
Mhm.
what Whimsy was for TWI. We need to highlight the fact that, the only significant delta between our credential format or credential
Mhm.
methodology and Whimsy ones is this provenance bit. And what exactly does that mean? So I think that's the meat of the IETF informational draft. Our requirements, restating them, I think just all it does, it creates a, a multi-master requirements, like which requirements we're
Yeah,
talking about.
but our requirement has to be reference from, first of all, has to be reference from the draft and should be part of the draft, even if it means deleting from there and moving it here.
Well, you know what? Then let's do that as part of the final editing step, because this is not
Okay.
something we should be like. We already know what our requirements are,
Yeah. Okay.
and if we need to
Fair
change
enough.
them, that's a separate conversation. So
Yeah.
for now,
Let's not go there. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
close to June 19, or whatever our cutoff is, we'll take our requirements and just move them into the draft and basically say, the draft as, we can even put it as a reference as listed in this other document, but copy it for you here,
Okay. Makes sense.
right?
So you want to expect to see the delta between what the TIDA.
I
I think the delta is is what we should be
Yeah,
are
so
targeting.
what do we want out of Whimsy? Like the one thing we want out of Whimsy is provenance,
Yes.
right? You can't really, right? Another thing we need to
Is the
understand
remote attestation, right? The
inside,
platform.
right, we need to incorporate remote attestation into this entire credential, and we can illustrate it with certain diagrams, which is the second thing I wanted to discuss today,
Yeah.
right? And then we should talk about things like context. What is context,
The
right?
context of the yeah.
Right. So, like, I mean, again, Windows identity, the Whimsy identity token is something that, it has all the right, binding to the workload instance that we care about. So we should talk about that, right? And that becomes, I think, much more forward-looking for us.
Sure. I will work on that.
Mhm.
And maybe
Yeah,
I will share
okay,
the
I'll take it up on myself to final now that we have our depot. I will move the requirements to GitHub, so we can start
okay.
tracking them there.
That's
Let's
fine.
now talk about sort of what else can we at least sort of as a group have a discussion of what are the main sections that we agree must be in the informational draft other than restating the requirements that we have.
Yeah.
So
Matthias has a hands up as well.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
would
thank you.
like to.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to jump in anyhow. Just wanting to restate what you guys said to be extra crisp on it. What is our position of this doc versus all our other deliverables? Because I mean, ultimately, I would assume IETF wanted to be self-contained, and we would probably need it, as the source of truth. But is the today's stance we are taking of this as only the vehicle of facilitating the conversation with IETF at the next summit, and actually our existing documents like the requirements docs and the architecture docs take precedence over that? This is just a reflection of them at the time for Madrid? Or are we already taking a stance of trying to converge towards this document and then the other documents become secondary in its light? I think it's the former, but I wanted to check with you.
I
Okay,
think
so
this is
Guy,
how we yeah, Mark, you would like to
let me
answer
start
for
with
yeah.
like I like to lead with guiding principles. The guiding principle is compatibility. Like as much as possible, we should remain compatible with the efforts in the industry. Like if we have to go our own way, our chances of success go down by an order of magnitude, roughly speaking. So let me give you an example. I was in conversations yesterday with the Spiffy team, Spiral, right, the implementation, the actual commercial offering. And we talked about their new broker API, like the Spiffy architecture, the node tester architecture does not work for confidential computing, right? So that, without Spiffy/Spiral doing something, there is no compatibility. And for that, this is where, we need to work with them to explain to them that, okay, this needs to change. Fortunately, there's this avenue called the ambient mode that allows us also to bring Istio into it, and Kubernetes can now start working with it. So that, if that can happen, that's a big win for us. Because again, this is where they need to bend to accommodate us. I would like to, understand what those places are and go after them very aggressively. Whimsy, same thing. If as much as possible, we need to understand how we fit inside their architecture. In places where it is not possible, we need to advocate for our requirements, explain them, work with them, and make sure they are considered, right? So I think this is the point of this document, is that communicate with Whimsy to ensure that compatibility. Now, Matesh, to your point, what is it that we would like to do? I believe that the work on the reference architecture needs to proceed in parallel with this, because it will help. Like this is like a natural synergy between the two, right? We're working out on the reference architecture. Perhaps we need to focus specifically on the Whimsy angle for the next several weeks, such that we can present the best possible, best thought through IETF draft to Whimsy, so that aligns with our thinking. Does that make sense?
So to reiterate what I heard, I would say this the following way. The sole purpose of this document at this time, it's probably gonna mature as we go forward, but at this time, the sole purpose of this doc is to facilitate the conversation at IETF Madrid. No more,
Yes.
no less.
Yes.
Yeah, and the
Something like that.
direction where this is fueled is like from this document to the greater one, or from the greater one derived into this one? I guess that's the only real question.
Okay, so we start, this is how I think about it. I start with reading the Whimsy architecture, right? And already we have an understanding of what confidential computing is capable of. Start by reading Whimsy architecture, understand the delta, understand where there are conflicts, and communicate to the Whimsy architecture our reference architecture, which should be 95% compatible, if not more, with Whimsy, right? And basically say, this is what we're doing. So for instance, we have a verifier. They don't. We have provenance. They don't, right? So this document will basically say, we fit inside Whimsy architecture in these ways, and we need this additional delta. So, we would like in the width, there has to be some sort of credential identifier that manages provenance. Okay, that would be really nice to get in there and get them to agree with it and understand how that works. And then also understand in the broader context that they have the S2S protocol, they have the context concept, right? So we should figure out how to communicate, how to express our compatibility with Whimsy, because Whimsy is a decent architecture. Like it does what it sets out to do. And I'm keeping an eye on it, as everyone should, right? So that, again, I hope I'm communicating clearly.
I think the question is this document has scope only as an interface to Whimsy, or this would be our medium to do future work for the entire of our span of CCC work item.
I think what our deliverable to the consortium is the reference architecture. The reference architecture is only as successful as it's compatible with existing successful industry efforts. So I would put Spiffy on that list. I would put Whimsy on that list, maybe others. Right. So the purpose of this document is to ensure that our collaboration with Whimsy is ongoing, is healthy, that we're compatible, that the necessary changes that Whimsy must make, otherwise we can't play in that space, that they're made somehow. We need to figure out. So this is why it's so good to have you, Yogesh, and Hank. You know, you guys are IT fault hands. You can help us shepherd through this. But the goal is, the founding principle is compatibility.
Okay, so we'll do much bigger activity in the realm of CCC, and this is just a compatibility interface communication with Whimsy.
Correct. So for instance, maybe within Whimsy, it's perfectly fine to just get enough of provenance, like a provenance identifier into a credential. Maybe we'll discover that we need more, but at a minimum, right? And then we, in our reference architecture, will say, if your relying party or another entity encounters provenance identifier in the credential, this is what you do with it. Whimsy does not particularly care. Well, we do. Right? So Whimsy, as far as Whimsy is concerned, the presence of verifier should not disrupt their protocols. But as far as we are concerned, we need to understand all the details of verifier/IDP integration. So yes, reference architecture is bigger than the Whimsy interface, but the compatibility must remain.
Okay, fair enough. I hope that answers Matthias' question as well.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and by the way, this is early
yeah.
days. If you disagree, if you're on this call and you're thinking that, I'm saying something wrong, now is a really good time to speak up because like it's going to be much more expensive to backtrack later. Okay.
I'm on mute. Sorry, I'm on mute. So it's a hard thing. It's a very, very, hard is a wrong term. It's a very blunt thing to say that we impose requirements on Whimsy. You're proposing them, of course, and they should make sense. So, that's the, I guess, the tone of the whole document. Because I heard this must be done, and this is just the opinion of yet another stakeholder from their perspective, I think.
Right. I mean, so look, I'm not going to say anything in this call, assuming that, Whimsy is kept in the dark of our shenanigans. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is you enter every negotiation knowing the absolute minimum that you need to get out of it. Right. And then you, by preparing for the negotiation, by exploring alternatives ahead of time, right? Negotiation is one and preparation. So yes, our conversations with Whimsy, they're negotiations. We are the beggar. They're the chooser. So we need to influence and convince.
Exactly.
Right. But for that, we need to understand what. Right. But we also need to understand our requirement.
Yes. Okay. You're on the same page. Thanks.
Sorry, Mark, you were saying something to me. Yeah.
Oh, no, please go ahead. You own this part of the conversation.
No. So yes, so I will keep working on this. In a day or two, I will publish a new version where, okay, I will just add the link and you put the requirements in that repo, please.
I'll shoot you an email once that is in the depot. Now let's agree right now. Let's in the next few minutes agree on at least a few key sections, maybe not all, that we believe this informational draft must address.
Yes.
Okay. So let's propose a few. Like I'll go first. There got to be a section on provenance. Okay, we'll figure out what goes into that section, but because it's one of our key requirements, should go in there. The proposal of how to integrate verifier into the credential issuance mechanism, and perhaps a few.
You mean attestation verifier, remote attestation verifier?
Correct. Yeah, I'm just using RAS terminology.
is it okay to borrow from the CSR attestation that already has a model for that?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe make Jogas, maybe a note to the CSR-attestation document. I guess it's
Yeah, we
necessary.
can roughly drive the high level flow, but not
Yeah.
necessarily
But
all the
CSR
semantics
is
because
X509 only, right?
yeah,
We also need
exactly.
widths.
Yeah.
We also
CSR
need-
is only X509.
Sure, there's no other way to get a certificate in X509. That's correct. There are other ways to get identifiers, I think, but the model still applies. So, so yeah, maybe with these visual words, I guess
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Again, another principle would be, of course, maximize reuse. Like, let's invent
Yeah.
as little as possible. Right. So then we need to understand, perhaps as a section, and we can put it on the list now, something about what does this mean for like whimsy protocols like S2S or context, right? Or width, or just basically like address the key concepts and mechanisms from whimsy in this draft and basically explain, we plan to use this as is. We plan to use this with a small extension, right? So width plus provenance identifier, or S2S as is, maybe, or context. This is how we plan to use it, if at all. Maybe there is no mention, but we should basically, go through the whimsy reference architecture and address all of these bits in this informational draft. And then maybe we can scope it back later. We'll say, this is too much for the initial, but I just want to start with, I want to understand sort of the,
the schema.
The kind of, what what our conversation with them should look like, so we don't miss anything important.
So provenance is definitely important. The integrating remote attestation into credential issuance. Yeah, that's important. Then, as I mentioned, the course, some kind of practical use cases which we differ from whimsy, like confidential computing. Do we have a real use case with confidential computing? Would you like to put that there, Mark? Certain key industry use cases, why our document is relevant actually.
Well, I would say SaaS. So here's your real world example. So let's say we would like to use Snowflake or Databricks. We have massive amounts of data, and we would like to share that data with the SaaS vendor for their processing, but we're not deploying their solution in our data center. We are, they expose some API, we send them data over the API. What does it take for us to ensure that data that we entrust to them is protected while in use? I don't know, maybe too ambitious, but this is, or
can you say that one more time, Mark? Walk me through your thought process again, please.
So my thought process is, can I have an assurance that the data that I entrust to a SaaS vendor is going to be protected while in use? Right. So, like, again, imagine you're a regulated institution. You have vast volumes of data. Some SaaS vendors want to take your data and run with it, process it. Right. I would like to know that I'm sharing my data with the right
technology that's going to maintain that encryption level and be able to maintain a level of efficiency and encryption throughout use, not just like FIPS 140-2 for at rest or in transit.
Another one is multi-party compute. So I work for a bank, and then perhaps you work for a healthcare provider, and we would like to, detect fraud in payments or in whatever, right? So we have regulatory obligations to keep our banking and healthcare data private, but we can agree on some common code that only the code will see the joint data set. So I would like to know that I'm sharing my portion of the data with that workload that we agreed upon, and the hospital would like to do the same.
Yeah. Okay. So I will put some titles and maybe we can add some text later on these use cases. At least we need two at least. Yeah, and I think you have given me two, so that's great. Okay, and what else in the draft? Yeah.
As you guys mentioned provenance, I think it would be interesting specifically for Whimsy because it's coming as a contrast to them to have like a chapter or something of that high level describing the binding to the platform that we want and the migration which stems as an aftermath after we have sufficient binding. But I think the mention of a platform and the ties of a credential to something physical might be interesting in the Whimsy world because it's gonna brings it as a link between the abstract concept of a TE and something ephemeral as a workload.
Oh, and separately, Hank, you mentioned the TLS and attestation. Are you talking about array-TLS or are you talking about something else?
No, CSR attestation.
Oh,
I mentioned.
CSR attestation.
Can you
put a
basically,
link?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, can you put a link on it? Because the thing is, I was drawing some diagrams for myself, trying to figure out how to combine CSR with attestation. And now that you spoke, I realized that I'm probably repeating somebody else's work. So I'd rather.
Yeah, this is in working group last call. So yeah, don't do that. It's in LAMS, where all the SMIME lightweight PKX work is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I have opened the data tracker right now.
Because I figured there's got to be a way to put a quote in a CSR and have the CA, forward that CSR to verify or something.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
all
exactly what they
the
discussed.
details. Yeah. You're spot on. And it is specifically the curious thing that CSR are not X509 documents. So it's an ASM1 document, yes, but not X509. And so, yeah, I will put the link into the chat as soon as I peel it out of my clipboard here.
Thank you.
But Hank, I have an observation. Like the CSR is a specific use case where you would issue certificates with checking the attestation trustworthiness. Here we want to be a generic relying party, right? And our credential issuer is a relying party in a sense, which checks the attestation credentials or attestation artifacts and make a judgment and issue credential, right? So we should not kind of.
It really depends on what you define as a relying party. So maybe it's useful to look at the two diagrams in that link that I just posted. I can also copy both diagrams directly here now because I kind of managed to peel them out of the document already. Here you go. So that is a modeling of the background check and the passport model with respect to a CA, which is a relying party, and a registration authority that is another relying party. So this is a multiple relying party model. Therefore, a specific hybrid of the RFC 9334 baseline pattern, I want to say. But both are basically going with evidence goes to the verifier. Typically, it's the background check model where the attester doesn't know the verifier. It just wants to issue a CSR, it puts it evidence in. Evidence, there's a lot sometimes, and then sends it to its standard peer, which is the registration authority. That one understands that, oh, there's evidence now in the CSR. Maybe I should only issue something if that evidence kind of checks out, and then relays it to a verifier. That's a certain assumption here. There's a second figure which basically assumes that the evidence already is appraised by a CSR issuing by a CSR issuer. So a CSR issuer has its own verifier. Now trust relationship between the RA, the registration authority, and the verifiers we established. So always it's about who are you able to establish a trust relationship with. In the background check model, there's a pre-existing trust relationship between the RA and the verifier. In the passport model, the RA has to figure out the trust relationship model between tester and verifier. And if it's not okay with the selection of verifier, you will never get a certificate, a CSR issuer, for example. So there are two models here, but both can apply in the wild, and both could apply to workload identification identifier issuing. It really depends on your application scenario.
Yeah. What I was saying is that, okay, maybe the formats cannot be kind of, there is no comparison, or there is no coherence in the formats, what is specified in CSR with what we want to do here. It's just the model or the flow can be
the
copied.
idea is that you have a trusted document. So there's some container document which is signed. In this case, it's a CSR. And that trusted document includes either evidence or attestation results. And now there you go. That's it, basically, right? And from there, you start to model your application data flow.
Okay, another point is a good point. I think who raised it? Is Matthias who raised it, or about binding of workload to platform? So we need some section what it means to
integrate the workload attestation with platform attestation.
Yep.
I very much agree that we need to do that. Is this something that Whimsy needs to hear about?
Well, I would argue this is like one of the core differences that we have between ourselves and Whimsy, because they assume the platform is just inherently trusted.
Right. Okay. Yes.
So if we say we attest to it, I think it's also like for the average reader, it's gonna make the distinction more vivid.
Yeah. So perhaps in the draft we should make a distinction between workload attestation and platform attestation.
Absolutely.
And then
have
a section basically explaining how the two are tied.
Yeah. I mean, that's the sole purpose of our goal here, right? For trusted, workload identity is to ensure that we're combining T and TWI to bring you a verifiable, secure platform that we have data provenance in terms of, from a workload data standpoint, from a T standpoint, and from a, virtualization or bare metal standpoint as to what software is running on there, right? Whether that be VMware, whether that be another hypervisor, or whether that be a container, etc. Is that not the purpose of us here?
Definitely, but I would also look from the point of the customer. So if I'm a workload stakeholder, I of course assume my workload is trustworthy. I want to only run it on trustworthy platforms. So the platforms are the ones that have to prove to me that they're worthy of running my workload. And the other way around, if I'm a platform provider, I can't just run any workload. It couldn't do whatever, right? The halting problem could occur and do something very weird. And so the customer now wants to understand that the workload is trustworthy. So, and maybe sometimes both happens mutually. So there's a mutual attestation thingy maybe happening. I don't know. So I guess it's from the customer's point of view. Who is our customer? Is it the platform provider or is it the workload creator?
Yeah. And I think the answer to that question is both, right? But I think we start with the hardware root of trust and then have a combined effort of attestation, right? Whether that's a MD5 hash or something, or invocation of trust zones or SMP7 or TDX.
Yeah.
And that verification, that hardware root of trust verification gives us the data holder or the workload holder that assurance, right? That provides us with that assurance to be able to move forward and verify that, okay, hardware is good. And then now move into whether that's a CSR, whether that's something else that we look at from an attestation of a workload perspective. And then we've got a third piece that is the actual data that we'll be bringing into the workload, right? So I think we've covered 1 and 2 more or less. It's the third. Is that what you're saying, Hank?
Yeah, I think it's the third is both can be a hybrid and also it can have a long red tail. Yeah, so we have to skip it at some point. But yes, you're correct.
Okay.
Okay, I would like to add another section. By the way, we need to be very careful with the, the 6 weeks or whatever we have left, that we don't put, create so much work for ourselves that we
can't handle
fail.
it.
Yeah. So we may need to do prioritization. So I think we need to touch on provenance. We need to touch on, I hear, combination of platform and workload. Integration. And but we probably don't even need to try like every possible scenario, just enough to illustrate that yes, it can work, and then we can put more meat on it as we go, but maybe just a little bit. We need to talk about reverse proxies. So proxy is part of Whimsy architecture. We need to understand how identity presents itself across a proxy. We should probably have just an entire meeting on that. Jaganathan, you have your hand up.
Can you assume that you will have a hardware available to establish hardware root of trust, especially in a cloud environment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a VM. So you're essentially getting an emulated TPM, right? So how do you ensure that you have a hardware available for
explain? So okay. So your workload identity is effectively a set of claims about a workload. Some of the claims, for instance, this is JP Morgan's payroll application, will come from the workload. Some claims, like this workload is running in Germany, will come from effectively you need to trust your service provider for that, whether it's your own data center management or whether it's Google's data center operator. Right, so you don't trust Google to say this is my payroll application, and you don't trust the workload to say I'm running in Germany, right? And in case of whether it's a hardware TPM or virtual TPM, the virtual machine identity, however that is expressed, and how it maps into a claim such as location, you will need to trust the cloud provider for that. So maybe in security considerations section of the informational draft, we can make that distinction. And I see Yogesh is taking a note. Excellent.
Yeah.
It will not be forgotten. Right. So, so you will have different claims about the workload, and you will have different sources for those claims, and you'll have different trust in those sources. And virtual TPM is, of course, especially I believe Google owns the root key to your virtual TPM. So, at least it's available to them. So it's, you accept if you operate inside Google's environment.
Yeah, I remember like you were making a point along the same lines in the last meeting also, that you will have to trust the cloud provider at some level. So we do have to note that.
You trust some people with your children and some other people with your money, and they're not the same children and the same people.
Well, it's just that like we have to note, I'm just stating that we have to note that assumption.
Correct. That's why I think that's why Yogesh is taking a note for the security consideration section. We will explain that. And as part of the combination of platform attestation with workload attestation, we're going to have to mention that. All right. So I think we have
enough.
Any other sections that we don't have listed yet? That's perhaps enough.
Quite a lot, actually.
Do we need like a secure boot or a measured boot section?
Well, that is part of platform attestation, right?
Okay.
So, so like, really, this is really hardware dependent. But a lot of what's considered secure boot is actually excluded from the TPM of a trans-execution environment. Hank.
Yeah, there's this weird thing that confidential computing contents are confidential. Yeah. So if the that's cool, right? So so if the workload is taking on the role of an attester, claims collection cannot happen by the platform. The workload kind of has to do its own attester work and provide evidence to the platform. That's an interesting thing. That is due to the confidential part of the confidential workload. And so now I think it's an interesting question to ask. How is that workload booting up? Can it do some authenticated boot? in order to with the VTPM, for example, and based on that knowledge, can it prove its trustworthiness to its platform, for example, by not exposing anything else because it's a confidential workload? I think that's a very interesting question. So when we're talking about this boot sequences, workloads boot up, of course you have a signed starting point that you typically put in your TE, and then it's validates, and you think, okay, that's great. But then again, it could do some authenticated boot inside the workload and present evidence about that to the external world, although it's a confidential workload. I'm not sure how relevant that scenario is, but it seems relevant to me.
Right. So, okay. So when it comes to platform attestation, you trust things like your virtual TPM and your cloud services provider. When it comes to workload attestation, you do not trust the statements by the virtual TPM because, well, it's not hardware based. So you would need to trust statements made by the hardware alone. Now, what goes into a hardware, like a trust execution environment quote, will not be the same as what goes into the TPM's PCRs. And we don't need to get to that level of detail in the informational draft. We need to make effectively a statement that there is a certain quote-unquote boot sequence that goes into the virtual TPM-based attestation with PCRs and all. And there is a separate boot sequence, quote-unquote, that goes into the quote that is presented by the trust execution environment. And I think that probably is enough. And again, Mateusz and Henki both have your hands up, so.
Yeah, so let me just add a thought here, and then I'm shutting up because that's red holding. But what you could do is to expect an attestation result from your platform about the VTPM, accepting that with your own authenticated boot sequence that might include a verifier role for that attestation result, sorry, a lying party role for that attestation result, and then go from there. So it is not unperceivable for me that is a scenario, but again, this is red holding on the details.
I would say, go ahead and write this up. Go ahead and write this up so we can discuss it in a subsequent reference architecture meeting. This is not for Whimsy. Whimsy doesn't care.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mateusz.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually continues the rat hole a bit, but I want to stress two things. One is, I think there is not that clean of a distinction of VTPM being purely software, ergo untrusted. I mean, technically you could, I think Microsoft is doing it this way.
I designed it, by the way.
Okay, then you know all about it. But in a nutshell, the way I understand it, it's, it's really quoted by the underlying TE, but the VTPM itself then becomes like, a layered trust on top of how the TD is booting.
Correct.
Now, what I wanted to say as well is, I do agree. I don't think we need to go into the level of, hey, we need like a TPM-based attestation, especially so, because, for example, just in case of Intel's TE, meaning Intel TDX, we technically can do the same without a TPM because we have this what's called RTMR, which is basically like a TPM PCR, but without the TPM overhead. So let's not harp too hard on the TPM
which
itself.
is exactly what I'm saying, that for purposes of the Whimsy, and when we talk about platform attestation versus T attestation, we'll say T claims, trust execution environment claims are hardware rooted, and platform attestation results come from the cloud services provider. We don't need to get into the mechanisms. And maybe the quality of claims coming from the cloud services provider are also hardware rooted via this convoluted mechanism that I've devised some years ago. But this is not a concern for Whimsy.
Agreed. I mean, I would only say we probably will get into this level of discussions, but I wouldn't say it's relevant for the IETF, at least not at the moment.
Correct. We'll get there. Okay. Okay. So in the remaining few minutes, I would like to draw your attention to a few things. First of all, in the reference architecture, and again, the reference architecture is very, very, very much a draft. So I just want to show you a couple of things I did, which are probably throwaway work, but I might as well bring them up. I'm going to share my screen. How do I? Oh, there we go. Sorry. All right. So I started using this mermaid thingy, and it's a little buggy, but mostly okay. I added this little section that basically saying there are 3 stages to credential usage, leading up to credential usage. One is credential provisioning, the second one is credential acquisition, the third is credential usage, and some of the stages can be combined. So here I drew a diagram called obtaining certificate from your certificate authority, which is probably that CSR thing that I will probably need to just make it look like the CSR thing. That's exactly what you would expect. In this case, your credential acquisition, there's no provisioning. There is no pre-provisioning of the credential. The credential is directly acquired by the workload, generates a key, creates a quote, creates a CSR with a quote, requests the certificate, and then eventually gets back some certificate. So again, feel free to critique, this is not the time. Another one is obtain certificate from HSM. So in this case, there is a provisioning stage, and that's where some workload owner goes and creates a certificate via a set of mechanisms with HSM, and then goes and creates a certificate, keeps the certificate, and the key remains in HSM. And then the credential acquisition is now the certificate, which is public, is handed by the workload owner to the workload. And then the workload creates a quote, gets a quote, in exchange that attestation results with the HSM for a private key, matching that certificate. So that's another dance where now that effectively allows one certificate with one key to be shared among multiple workloads, and only workload that passes attestation gets the key. Again, feel free to critique, or maybe it's captured elsewhere. I should reuse prior art, please say so. Anyway, so please review what's in here and provide comments, because we're not going to have enough time now. Yeah, Jagannathan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so I remember this conversation last week also. I put together a use case for our cloud and some feedback. I have also a diagram to share.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to figure out how to establish identity in our case. Is it okay for me to share it?
Oh yeah, please. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm just drawing attention, guys. Please take a look at the reference architecture. Feel free to start authoring content there. Review what others put in, so we can basically continue with that work. Go ahead. You can share the screen now.
So this is what, can you see my screen?
Yeah, and this is not, what software are you using to create this?
So this one, I had already something going on. It's called sequencediagram.org.
Okay. Just we'll need something that works with GitHub, but okay.
I have a text-based, this one also.
Yeah.
So, like, I'll just take like a few minutes. So there is the Verision server. It's the verifier in our case. Relying party, TE, and the certificate authority. So in the TE, we have this thing called RATSD, which is an evidence collector, which collects evidence from various attesters like SEV, SNP, TPM, and so on. But the first problem is this RATSD, which is running in a VM, we have to confirm that this RATSD is trustworthy. So what we thought was we would perform an attested CSR request, providing some evidence to a CA, and then the CA would issue us some kind of an identity on the confirmation that the RATSD is okay. So what I'm trying to, what I'm maybe grappling with is how do I bootstrap trust in RATSD and establish an identity, because this is not in a scenario where there is a platform and a workload where you have a platform to trust on. So it's just like an individual TE. And without a platform, I have to establish trust and identity on RATSD. So what model should I use to do that?
So that depends on, can you, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the TE should be self-certifying, or the certification material should come pre-provisioned.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So the certification of the TE should be pre-provisioned. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing here is we need to define our building blocks. So like bootstrapping trust in a platform, bootstrapping trust in a T, and then start basically combining higher level protocols from these. Otherwise, every diagram is going to have to go into all the details.
Yeah, these are modular building blocks. You have to go on early on and then reuse them in the more complex.
Yeah, and just basically give them names. So we have a terminology saying, you know, like we have a passport model and background check model. Like now we all understand what they are. So we'll probably need to build up more of these building blocks for our purposes.
Okay, yeah, but I just wanted to present my use case. That's an issue.
But your RADSD is like a daemon running inside the VM.
Yes, yeah.
Well, as such, unless you're running it in an enclave, it's not going to have its separate isolated identity.
It isn't so I think VM means confidential, VM means enclave, right?
It is.
No.
Okay.
So, I mean, I suppose you could try and run a VM in an SGX. I don't know if anyone succeeded.
Not in an SGX, but in a TDX or SCD.
So to me, enclave is like it's like a process or procedure that you call that's isolated, but doesn't have like an independent scheduler. It doesn't have
passive.
Right. It's kind of this. It's a small contained thing, and a VM or a container is the entire address space that contains multiple processes in it.
Yeah, got it.
So RADSD can like it's either part of the entire confidential VM and then doesn't have its own separate identity, or way more difficult to do, but it's an enclave. And then you can attest it independently.
So this is not part of an enclave because this is supposed to be generic. I suppose so. Enclave is specific to SGX, I suppose.
Well, there's Nitro enclave. We don't like to talk about Amazon in the consortium, but face it. Yeah, enclaves are far less common.
But I think the idea is if you have just some process that's collecting evidence, the thing that you're collecting evidence from should be certified. So if you have a daemon running inside an SNP or a TDX VM, it can collect that attestation evidence, and that attestation evidence has been signed by the processor. If you're collecting it from a TPM, that TPM has been that TPM attestation is also signed by the hardware TPM. If you're using a virtual TPM, then you're just kind of making stuff up anyway. So,
which is fine in our trust model, by the way, making stuff up about the platform. Okay, let me just say one thing. We have a couple of minutes left. May I propose that for the next meeting, we'll focus on one thing. I don't know, let's pick one. I mean, I would suggest combining platform claims with trust execution environment claims, but like one thing that we can focus, largely finish, and move to others. Any other proposals for another something that's like a higher priority, but just like as Yogesh is working on it, I want to make sure we don't spend too much time scattered. It will be very difficult to gather if we scatter.
Sure.
So
if there's nothing else in the last minute, I kind of wanted to pick Mark's brain on the open letter from your CISO.
I haven't read it yet. I heard that it was blunt.
Yeah, it's blunt, and it also mentions confidential computing. So
I've been in his ear.
Good stuff. It's a cool
I
shirt,
built
by the
my
way.
entire career whispering into Commander-in-Chief's ear, be it Mark Rusinovich or our CISO or whatever. So, let me put it this way. Let me read it, and we're actually having some even blunter conversations internally that we hope to make public too. And then I, either in this forum or in, in an email to you, I can, if you have any particular questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you all. I'll see you next week, and happy RSA for those of you who are attending.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Wait, Mark.
yep.
Mark. Ow. Blah, blah, blah. Hey, Dan, I posted my identity assurance ideas in in the Git. I hope that was an appropriate place to put them. Mark told me to just post them somewhere. I don't know where he wanted me to post them.
Okay.
Anyway, it's issue 53 now. Does that mean somebody will look at it?
If you have the link and you can drop it into chat here or drop it into Slack.
In a Slack. Oh shoot! You know, I don't know if I'm on the Slack channel. I did drop it into the chat here.
Okay, it might have been before I joined. You
Seen
joined
a
at
lot
the
of.
end.
I haven't seen a lot of config computing org activity except in governance. So where was that? If not in governance?
Here, I just posted the link. I
Okay.
gotta run.
So
I gotta run to another meeting, guys. Sorry. Hey, good
No
job.
problem.
Keep up the
I
good
also
thing.
have to do that. Thanks. So I will grab
All right,
that link.
thanks, Mark.
Copy link. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.